You had one unit about nerve muscle physiology where you have learned about the structure of the neuron, structure of the junction, and structure of the muscle. So the part of neuron is not new to you. So when you talk of synapse, this basically means a communication between two or more neurons, a neuron and a muscle, or even for that matter, a neuron and a gland also is considered to be a synapse. But generally in neurophysiology, we refer to the junction between two neurons as a synapse. But neuromuscular junction is also considered a type of synapse, and the junction between the neuron and the gland, say the salivary glands, the digestive glands, which also have their own nerve supply, they are also considered as synapses. They follow the same scheme of things: presynaptic element, synaptic cleft, and the postsynaptic membrane. Now today's objectives are, we will first try to define a synapse and describe its structure and functions. Types of synapses, we will see what are those. We will describe the transmission across a typical chemical synapse. This will be something you have already learned. We will revise and will differentiate between two terms, EPSP and IPSP. So these are the four objectives for our class today. So in CNS there are around 10 to the 11 neurons, 10 to the power 11 neurons. You can see enormous amount of activity which happens at any given time of the day. There is a rough estimate that we have around 6 to 7 lakh thoughts a day. Of course, you don't act on all of this, but that is the amount of activity which goes on in the brain. And in the preceding lecture, we have seen snippets where we talked about that there are different parts of the brain which are concerned with thoughts, some concerned with memories, some concerned with emotions. So all these parts basically have lot of neurons, and communication between neuron to neuron, that is one part of the body to another part of the, so one part of the brain to another part of the brain. This happens in the form of electrical signals. These electrical signals are called as action potentials. You have already read about action potentials. This is not new to you. And the junction across which this communication takes place, that is from one neuron to another neuron, is called as a synapse. Why are synapses important? Because as we just described, knowing the structure and transmission across the synapse helps us to identify how information travels from one part of the brain to another part. Remember, whatever we think of, it is always sourced or derived from what is already there in our memory. We might think about the past, we might think about the present, we might think about the future. But we cannot imagine or we cannot think of something which is not there in our memory. Right? We may think of sci-fi movies where whatever you see, sometimes quite absurd and bizarre things also are shown in science fiction movies. But remember, someone thought about all of this, and each of the components was of course sourced from a past experience or a past memory. The overall scheme of things in science fiction may be very absurd, but the individual elements are drawn from the memory. So we cannot think without relying or drawing input from our memory. So memory in a very broad way is stored in the synapses all across the cerebral cortex. The different lobes all across the cortex, these are stored. So whatever we think, if you want to start a voluntary action, the first thing that should happen is a thought. If you want to write, the first thing that should come to your mind or activity starts from the thought of writing. So all forms of activity that you can think of, they arise from thought. And enormous amount of activity goes on in the brain, and the brain needs to communicate in different parts. Synapses provide the portal by which they will communicate. They also provide a portal for modifying. That means integrating a lot of input, as you can think of the sensory system. Sensory nervous system gets information throughout the body, right? And all the sensations that you can think of, pain, touch, pressure, temperature, all of this, they reach the sensory cortex. Each individual sensation that you can think of has its own distinct sensory pathway. But as a whole, this needs to be integrated in the broader scheme of things. The integration is a function of CNS. I'll give you one small example. You have read about the retina in your school level. So retina has got 10 layers. So from the layer of the receptors, that is rods and cones, till the layer of the ganglion cells which forms the optic nerve, it is a converging neural circuit. The number of rods and cones are many times more than the number of bipolar cell, which in turn are many times more than the number of ganglion cells. So ganglion cells or the optic nerve is the sensory nerve which takes it to the occipital lobe of the brain. So what is the advantage of having this number of receptors? The advantage is anywhere in our visual field if there is an activity, it can be picked up. Now remember, layers of neurons are there, so they need to be convergent. Structurally they need to be convergent so that information from anywhere in the visual field can eventually make its way to the optic nerve. So this is one function when I say integrating a lot of things. So synapses agar na hote, these things would not have happened. It is because of synapse and the properties of synapse which make it possible. Spreading out the information. In the previous class where I have given you some idea about the different transmitter systems of the brain. If you remember acetylcholine or dopamine or for that matter norepinephrine networks. So networks, they originate in some nucleus in the brain stem from where they fan out to the cerebral cortex diffusely. So this is an example where the action or information is spreading from a nucleus to the entire cerebral cortex. So spreading out is also made possible because of the nature of the synaptic circuits. Both excitatory and inhibitory types of impulses are made possible to converge on a particular or a single neuron. So at times both need to be taken together. For example, is the cerebellum. The cerebellar circuits have a very unique function. So whenever we think of any motor activity, cerebellum initially, the role of cerebellum is in providing the initial push in the beginning of the movement, right? Of course, the movement starts from the motor cortex, but starting may the cerebellum reinforces the beginning of the movement. In between, it smoothens the individual movements. So example, again I'll give you, if you think of writing, there are so many component movements. So on one side, you will be making a movement here, then you will be making a movement the wrist, then you will be holding your pen like this, and depending on the alphabet that you are writing, you will be making different types of movements. So every movement is composed of such type of individual movements. Cerebellum makes all of this smooth. And when you want to stop a movement abruptly, there are some situations where we start with an enormous force, but at one point it needs to abruptly stop. Say if you have seen cricket matches, the fast bowling the bowler bowls with a lot of speed, right? But as soon as the ball is delivered, their movement stops. So this type of situations where abruptly a movement needs to be stopped, again the cerebellum comes into action. So ये examples है where दोनों aspects are there. Sometimes excitation needs to be reinforced and sometimes it needs to be inhibited. Later on when we talk of cerebellum, we will see that the cerebellar circuit has inbuilt mechanisms of providing this inherent checks and balances which make our movements very smooth. So this is again made possible because of synapses, the nature of the synaptic circuits. And because we know the mode of transmission, we can also block as and when required in disease. You have read about the neuromuscular blockers already in the previous units. So knowing the synapses also help us to devise ways by which you can block the transmission when there is disease or as required. Now moving on to the types of synapses, you can broadly classify them into anatomical types and physiological types. Now, anatomical type of synapse, there as you can see, pre-synaptic element kaun sa hai and post-synaptic element kaun sa hai. So depending on this, we have exodendritic synapse. So this is the example of an axon terminating on the dendrite of a post-synaptic neuron. So in CNS, the commonest type of synapse is this exodendritic type of synapse. Exosomatic, where the axon is terminating directly on the cell body of the neuron, and exoaxonic, where it is when one axon is terminating on the other axon. So exoaxonal or exoaxonic type of synapse. Some areas of the CNS, like the thalamus for example, also has synapses where dendrites form the presynaptic part. So dendroaxonic synapses, dendrodendritic synapses, so where these are also possible in certain areas of the brain like the thalamus. Moving on to the physiological types. Now depending on the nature of transmission, तो anatomical classification था कि presynaptic and postsynaptic elements में what were the components. Now in this particular type of classification, we classify on the basis of the nature of transmission. Chemical synapses में the transmission is made or it happens through a neurotransmitter, a chemical transmitter, and most synapses of the CNS are of this particular type. Electrical synapses, they transmit information with the help of gap junctions, and through gap junctions, when we talk of charges or charged ions moving from one cell to another cell, these are called as local potentials or electrotonic potentials, small potential changes directly made possible by the movement of charged ions. We find examples of this in the retina, and we find one more example in the olfactory bulb. So this example, this picture helps you to appreciate the differences between the chemical and the electrical synapses. Chemical synapses, as you can see, there is a presynaptic element where in synaptic vesicles, chemicals are stored, and on stimulation, they are released into the cleft. Then they will bind to the receptors on the postsynaptic membrane and exert their action or effect. This is an example of electrical synapse. Electrical synapse, as I said, happens with the help of gap junctions. Gap junctions are composed of a type of protein called as what? You had this question in the last exam also. Gap junctions are formed of proteins called as connexins. So connexins, as you can see here, they provide a low resistance bridge between two adjacent cells. Connexons are individually composed of proteins called as connexins. So they provide low resistance pathways or portals through which charges can move from one particular cell directly to the other cell. We are talking of charged ions here. So this type of transmission, as I said, is also called as electrotonic spread. Try to recall in the classes on general physiology, you must have learnt about action potential, you must have learnt about resting potential, and in between a local potential. So local potential is a local change in the ions or the polarity across a membrane, but not strong enough to produce a action potential. So this type of changes we call as electrotonus. Okay. Now what are the main differences? Before we move on to the third type of synapse that is there is conjoint. The conjoint synapse has the properties of both a chemical transmission as well as electrical transmission. And the example that we see here is in the lateral vestibular nucleus. So this is a nucleus in the brain stem. We'll come to talk about its function in the coming lectures. So there you find both the types of transmission which is possible. Moving on to the next important topic, that is the differences between the electrical and the chemical synapse. Nature or mode of transmission, you already know by this time. In one it happens through the transmitter, the other one it is happening through electrotonic spread across gap junctions. Now because in a chemical synapse, the synaptic vesicles are stored in the presynaptic part or presynaptic neuron. This is unidirectional spread of impulse. So impulse can only flow from the presynaptic element or neuron to the postsynaptic neuron, not the other way. But here, because you're talking of movement of charged ions, so here bidirectional transmission is possible. Right? This is the second difference. Third aspect is the susceptibility to fatigue. Right? So what do we mean by fatigue? Anyone? I don't know the definition. What is your idea of fatigue? When there is repeated activity, if there is a reduced output, reduced productivity, reduced efficiency of the action. So this is what we broadly refer to as fatigue. Here what is there, because we are talking of chemical transmitters which are released from the presynaptic neuron, if you stimulate it repeatedly, they can be exhausted, right? This is called as release depletion, and they can thus lead to a development of fatigue. The transmitters which are there in the presynaptic neuron, they are produced somewhere else, right? And it takes time to produce. Why? Because certain raw materials, for example, if you think of acetylcholine, you need to procure choline mostly from the diet, or then you also need to procure acetyl coenzyme A and all of this. So lot of raw materials need to be procured and placed at one place, and then synthesizing enzymes should act on this. This also takes up a lot of energy, and then finally these chemicals need to be packaged in the synaptic vesicles. So all of this is time consuming. So that's why when you stimulate it repeatedly, there is a possibility of exhaustion. Here the susceptibility to fatigue is less because we are only talking of transmission of charges from one cell to the other cell. Speed of transmission, it is slower in a chemical synapse, it is obvious, and where there is direct spread of charges or ions, it is faster. And as we have just discussed, most synapses of the body are of this type. Electrical synapses we only find in certain parts of the body. Now, functional anatomy of the synapse. So as we have been discussing, there is a presynaptic element, a synaptic cleft, and a postsynaptic element. So what are the key points that are there? You also try to draw parallel from the structure of neuromuscular junction. You will find a lot of similarities. So axon terminal is usually the presynaptic element, but it's not always, right? Axosomatic, exodendritic. Usually it is the axon, but it can also be a dendrite. Now as the axon approaches the synapse, it loses its myelin sheath and divides into branches, lot of branches, each branch making a contact with the postsynaptic element. Now before it makes a contact, it forms a circular knob-like structure called as a synaptic knob or a synaptic button. So this is the place where neurotransmitters are present in the vesicles, and these transmitters can be both inhibitory and excitatory. So in the previous class, we have talked about different types of transmitters, some of them inhibitory and some of them excitatory. And of course, the presynaptic element also has, the neuron also has voltage gated calcium channels. So you see the abundance of mitochondria toward the end, in the synaptic knobs. So why do you think it's important? Why should mitochondria be there in abundance in synaptic knobs? Because it is an energy exhaustive process. You need a lot of ATP in this entire process. Now in most of the synapses, you will find that there are some particular areas called as active sites or active zones from where neurotransmitters are released. A lot of criteria. When will you call something as a transmitter? You remember this classification. So some of them are called as small molecule and some of them are large molecules. Acetylcholine, right? Amino acids and amines. They are the ones which form the small molecule transmitters, meaning their vesicles are small and on electron microscopy the structure is clearer, right? So they have also short latency, that means they can act instantaneously, and because of this also their action is of a short duration. This point is important. Now they are released from the active sites in the presynaptic neurons, whereas the large molecule ones, you can see all of these are different forms of peptides, neuropeptides. They have a longer latency, that means they start acting late, and they can act for a longer duration of time, but at the same time, their action is more long lasting. So if you see this difference, large molecule ones, they can be synthesized from any part, they can be released from any part of the presynaptic membrane. So this is one important point of difference. So when we talk of synapses, small molecule transmitters are released from the active sites only or active zones only. Large molecule ones, that is the peptides, they can be released from any point of the presynaptic membrane. Now once the neurotransmitter is released, it acts on the cleft, it releases into the cleft, and then it acts on its receptor. At some point, it has to stop its action. So it can either be degraded by enzymes like cholinesterase in case of acetylcholine. It can be reuptaken into the presynaptic neuron for reuse and recycling. It can diffuse away from the synapse, and then thus the action can stop. And in some cases, like the amino acids, the neuroglial tissue, the glial cells can remove it from the cleft. So this is how the action will stop. I'll skip through all of this. So if you talk of the transmitters, before I move on to the synapses in further detail, glutamate, it is the most excitatory transmitter of the CNS, and you see the synapses for glutamate are mostly exodendritic type of synapses. Also look at this particular diagram. You can see that there are two types of receptors. One of them is an ion channel and the other one is a G protein coupled receptor. Now this one, G protein coupled receptor, is a receptor which spans the cell membrane 7 times and is bound to a G protein. I will come to this in a bit. GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, it is an inhibitory transmitter of the brain and especially important in retina where it starts the process of signal transmission. So you can see that both pre and post synaptic inhibition can be done with the help of GABA. GABA has got two types of receptors, GABA A and GABA B. So GABA A is actually a chloride channel. So whenever it is binding, the chloride channel opens and chloride ions, which are negatively charged ions, they enter the cell, right, producing an inhibition over here. GABA B on the other hand is as you can see, is a G protein coupled receptor, and at the end of it, it will either open a potassium channel or it will close a calcium channel. So normally potassium is more inside the cell, right? The concentration of potassium is more inside the cell, less outside the cell. So if the potassium channel is kept in open state, potassium efflux will keep on happening and the cell membrane, the negativity will increase from minus 70 millivolt, it can reach up to minus 80, minus 90 millivolt. That means the cell can become hyperpolarized by loss of positive charges. Glycine is again one more amino acid. This is the major inhibitory transmitter in the spinal cord. The spinal cord, it has a dorsal horn and a ventral horn. In some parts, it also has one interneuron in between the dorsal and the ventral horns. So glycine is the major inhibitory transmitter in the spinal cord. Acetylcholine, we have talked about the functions already. Just try to recall the sites where it is present in the brain. Remember, acetylcholine is also present in other areas of the body. I am trying to focus only in the brain. So this is the location, these are the areas where it is present, and it spreads diffusely throughout the cortex as well as basal forebrain. And it has got a lot of functions starting from arousal, memory and REM, sleep. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, it is released from locus coeruleus and it is having a lot of functions. Diffuse projections that you see all across the cortex are associated with the state of arousal, attention and dreaming. The projections to the hippocampus are concerned with learned behavior. The projections to the amygdala are concerned with mood, and the projections to the hypothalamus are concerned with control of the sympathetic nervous system. The descending projections to the spinal cord also help in modulating pain. Dopamine again has got two sets of projections. One set, the one which you see in brown, is concerned with the reward circuit of the brain, motivation and behavior, and the one you see in black, released from a nucleus called the substantia nigra, So they are concerned with motor control. Serotonin is released from a nucleus called the raphe nucleus of the brainstem, and descending projections help in modulating pain. The projections that you see over here are concerned with the limbic circuit. Limbic system is concerned with generation of emotions and regulation of mood, and it also, the diffuse projections also are concerned with arousal, right? So this I have just revised the neurotransmitters that we have already discussed in the last class. So let's see on the entire process. This is the axon terminal, the synaptic knob, synaptic vesicle, mitochondria, presynaptic membrane, the cleft, that is a 20 to 40 nanometer gap between the pre and postsynaptic membranes, and this is where receptors are present. Now the receptors can be of two types: ionotropic receptors, which means they are ion channels. What type of ion channels? They are ligand gated ion channels. Ion channels can be of two types: voltage gate, a lot of types can be there, but generally we come across two types: voltage gated ion channels and ligand gated ion channels. Voltage gated ion channels are the ones you see in generation of action potential, which open or close depending on the membrane potential. Ligand gated ion channels mean when a suitable ligand binds to the ion channel, it opens. So this one that you see here, these are ligand gated ion channels. Second one that you see is the metabotropic type of receptor. This type of receptors exert their final action with the help of second messenger systems, and usually they are G protein coupled receptors, as you can see here. So this diagram you must also have come across in your endocrine physiology. It is actually a lot of hormones also transmit with the help of G protein system. So this is a receptor which is bound to a G protein. Now G protein is a trimeric protein, meaning there are three subunits: alpha subunit, beta and gamma subunit. This is the G protein. Why is it called as a G protein? Because it is bound to a guanine nucleotide. So in this case it is GDP. So in inactive state it is bound to GDP. Whenever the particular transmitter or the ligand binds to the receptor, now it activates this system, and as soon as it activates, GDP is exchanged for GTP, right? This is the first thing that happens, and the activation process further splits this trimeric protein into two parts. Alpha subunit separates and beta gamma subunit separates, and the subunits then have a cascade of effects. So they can activate open they can open the ion channels. As you can see in this example, a potassium channel has been opened. They can activate enzymes like adenylyl cyclase and guanylyl cyclase, which eventually will produce cyclic AMP from ATP or cyclic GMP from GTP. It can also activate gene transcription in certain areas. So this is a metabotropic type of receptor. Why? Because they are relying on a second messenger system. Second messenger in this case is the cyclic AMP, protein kinase and all of this. Okay. Now what are the four basic steps of synaptic transmission? So whenever, as we discussed, you try to recall and draw parallels with the neuromuscular junction, you will find, as I said, a lot of similarities will be there. The first step is the release of the neurotransmitter. Now this happens only when the impulse in the presynaptic neuron reaches the synaptic terminal, and voltage gated calcium channels, they are able to open, and when voltage gated calcium channels open, they release a transmitter by exocytosis. Now this process is not as simple as it seems. There are some important proteins which help in this process. So calcium channels are there. So as the impulse reaches the transmitter, the calcium channels open and there is calcium influx into the presynaptic element. So the vesicles containing the transmitter are pushed towards the membrane and then they are released. So the transmitter is then released into the synaptic cleft. The transmitter binds to its receptors on the postsynaptic membrane, and initially they produce a local depolarizing change. So remember here, this was also true for neuromuscular junction. The initial response is always a local change or a local potential. If this local change is strong enough, if this local change is a depolarizing change and strong enough to produce or cross the threshold, it produces a action potential. Neuromuscular junction में acetylcholine also produces a local potential called as the motor end plate potential. Now end plate acetylcholine is an excitatory transmitter by itself. That is why the change that is produced here is also a depolarizing change. So only a depolarizing change can eventually lead to production of a action potential, not a hyperpolarizing. So eventually this will be degraded. Now these proteins that I wanted to show you, docking and fusion proteins are proteins which enable the fusion of the synaptic vesicle with the membrane of the presynaptic neuron. So within the synaptic vesicle we have proteins called as synaptotagmin and synaptobrevin, which are also examples of V snare, vesicular snare. It is an activity which is happening in the presynaptic part. Vesicle mein there is a protein called as V snare, and the presynaptic membrane, it has a protein called as T snare or target snare, T for target. So V snare and T snare के बीच में there is a interaction. This is what enables the fusion, and the proteins which enable this are called as docking proteins. So what is the dock? A dock comes from ships. As a ship approaches its harbor, what happens? Harbor or ship के बीच में usually you will always find a wooden plank or a wooden structure. So that is what is called as a dock, the ship and the harbor. So similarly, there you have a vesicle here and the membrane here. Vesicle also is bound by a membrane. तो दोनों membranes के बीच में जो interaction है, V snare and T snare. T snare के examples क्या है? Syntaxin and SNAP25, right? Why am I talking of all of these proteins? Not only because they are interesting to know, but diseases like tetanus toxin, then botulinum toxin, both of these toxins interrupt this process by you affecting either the V snare or the T snare. So tetanus and botulinum poisoning may, whatever happens, it's happening because it is interrupting the synaptic activity, where in the presynaptic part of the synapse. So that is why you should know this. So this is the whole process. So there is a fusion between these two proteins, eventually leading to the exocytosis which is happening. Okay. Now as I said, postsynaptic potential membrane may you have a local potential. Now if the local potential is a depolarizing type, we call this EPSP, excitatory postsynaptic potential. If it is inhibitory type, it is called as IPSP. Inhibitory means it makes the membrane potential more negative. The neuron may, the resting potential is minus 70 millivolt. So if the transmitter is an inhibitory transmitter, it will make it more negative. So from minus 70 it has gone down to minus 80, right? So this is decided by the transmitter which is released in the synaptic cleft from the presynaptic membrane. So EPSP के examples कौन से transmitters? Acetylcholine, glutamate, serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline. Almost all the transmitters that we have discussed in the previous slides, they are excitatory. And how do they bring about their activity? Look at this diagram. So in some way or the other, they will open a sodium channel. Either by अगर receptor खुद एक ionotropic receptor है, that means a ligand gated ion channel है, then it's very easy to understand. The ligand of the transmitter binds and the sodium channel opens. Even if it is a metabotropic type of receptor, as you have seen with glutamate, they can also open a sodium channel. But remember, EPSP may always there is a cation channel and commonly a sodium channel which opens, allowing influx of sodium ions. So sodium ions अगर cell के अंदर गए, what will happen to the polarity of the cell? minus 70 से it will gradually start becoming more and more positive, right? So this is what happens. IPSP में there are two possibilities which can be there. In one possibility, a potassium channel can be opened. Transmitter bound to the receptor. Now it has opened a potassium channel. Potassium cell के अंदर ज़्यादा है, so it will, once the channel is opened, there is potassium efflux. So positive ion or positive charge leaves the cell. Now this becomes more negative. So minus 70 से minus 80, minus 90 millivolt तक it can go. Alternately, it can also open a chloride channel. The chloride channel, when it is opened, it permits influx of chloride ions from the outside to the within the postsynaptic neuron. So this example is where a negative ion is entering the postsynaptic membrane. So here also what has happened? In both of these two possibilities, B and C, in both the scenarios, the net result is that inside the postsynaptic neuron, negativity has increased. So this is a hyperpolarized state. This is IPSP. Now what do you think? Which one can lead to an action potential? Action potential by definition is a depolarizing change. Depolarization followed by repolarization and restoration of the resting state produced on application of a threshold stimulus. तो ये जो दोनों examples है, out of this, IPSP can never produce an action potential, right? क्यों? Because it is a hyperpolarizing change. It is making the cell more negative. Both this EPSP and IPSP, these are examples of local potentials. Local potential or action potential में there are a lot of very significant differences. One of the important differences EPSP, local potentials, EPSP, IPSP and any of this, the magnitude of local potentials depends on the stimulus, right? जितना ज़्यादा stimulus होगा उतना ही ज़्यादा magnitude का response आएगा. This is true for local potentials. Action potential में this is not true. Once you give a threshold stimulus, you have a maximum response. Even if you give a higher strength of stimulus, you still have the maximum response. So this law is what? All or none law. If you give a sub-threshold stimulus, there is no response. So the tissue will either respond by an action potential or it will not respond by an action potential. So there is no relationship between the strength of the stimulus and the magnitude of the action potential, which can be seen here. So EPSP को, if you keep on increasing the strength of the stimulus, that means presynaptic neuron में by any mechanism, if there are more number of impulses coming to the presynaptic neuron, more transmitters will be released and the magnitude of EPSP will increase. If it keeps on increasing and say plus 15 millivolt ka positivity it is able to touch, so this can then trigger an action potential. Why? Because this is the firing level for neurons. Minus 70 millivolt RMPA neuron ka, if in a neuron there is plus 15 to 20 millivolt of positivity from its resting potential of minus 70 millivolt, we call this the firing level. That means this is the threshold. So once it touches the threshold, it can produce a full-fledged action potential, right? So this is what happens in the EPSP. IPSP may, even if you keep on increasing the stimulus, the magnitude will increase, but this increase is in the negative direction. So negative direction में अगर ज़्यादा it will not produce a action potential. So however much you increase the strength of the stimulus, when an IPSP is produced, impulse transmission will always stop there because it is negative. And long distance communication from neuron to neuron happens in the form of action potential, not through negative potential changes. It is only through action potentials which it can produce. What other differences you can see? EPSP, IPSP में एक तो ये हो गया कि EPSP is a positive, IPSP is a negative change. One difference is this. EPSP can produce an action potential, IPSP cannot produce an action potential. And if you look at the diagram carefully, you also see certain changes. You see EPSP happens faster. The latency is around only 0.5 milliseconds. IPSP starts a little longer, 2 milliseconds latency is there. And generally the magnitude is larger for EPSP and lesser for IPSP. So these are the differences between EPSP and IPSP. This is a common question in exams, right? Now body mein what actually happens? Now it is not that simple in the body. So till now whatever you have tried to understand, this is in a very simplistic fashion. In body the neurons have, each of the neurons have multiple synaptic connections like this, right? So in example you can see that in motor neurons in the spinal cord, a single cell or a neuron can have 10,000 to 2 lakh synapses, right? And some of them may be excitatory, some of them may be inhibitory. So the net result that is produced in the postsynaptic or the result or the effector neuron is an algebraic sum of the EPSPs and IPSPs that is there. Is it clear? Some of them will be excitatory, some of them will be inhibitory. Algebraic sum leke jitna hoga, that will decide the net effect on the postsynaptic neuron. This property is called as summation. Summation means addition. If you give two stimuli one after the other, so this is called as temporal summation. Summation in time. एक के बाद आपने 2-3 stimuli दे दिया, and remember because these are local potentials also they can add up and increase the resultant. Action potential में summation नहीं होगा because action potential is always at its highest. All or none law, the magnitude is always at its peak when you talk of action potential. Now because these are local potential, when you give it one after the other, they will add up, right? Summation of stimuli, and when their magnitude after addition, if it touches the firing level or the threshold level, it will produce a full-fledged action potential. So when we give stimuli more than one stimuli one after the other and they add up, this is called as temporal summation or summation in time. This example that you see is the other type of summation, spatial summation, summation in space. Here you see that one postsynaptic cell has got 3 synapses, out of which 2 are excitatory and 1 is inhibitory. So when you have 2 or more stimuli acting simultaneously on a single target, so all the presynaptic activities happening together, this type of summation is called as summation in space or spatial summation. Time factor nahi hai yahan pe. So here what you find, all this is happening together and the net effect is the algebraic sum of all of this. If after addition of all of this, it is able to touch the firing level, it will produce action potential. If not, it will die off exponentially, right? So when the summated potential doesn't reach the firing level, no action potential is produced and it dies off exponentially. So action potential, if it is not produced, the impulse transmission will stop there. Now where in the axon? So this is where all the activity was happening and they were all transmitting impulses to the synapses here. Eventually all this will reach the axon hillock, which is called the initial segment of the neuron. Why this part? This is because this part has got plenty of voltage gated sodium channels. So this is the area where the action potential will start and then it will propagate further, right? This is important to know because action potential where there was also a positive feedback cycle, if you remember, Hodgkin cycle, right? Voltage gated sodium channels, as soon as they have some type of positivity in the membrane, if the channels are more, they will all open and they will allow more and more sodium ions to come inside, which in turn will depolarize the membrane more and open more and more channels. So you need a lot of sodium channels to produce an action potential. Read about the Hodgkin cycle today when you go to the hostel. In the chapter on action potential, you come across this positive cycle, positive feedback cycle. So this is allowed to happen here. Here because in the cell body, other parts of the cell body, because the voltage gated channels are not that much, it is not possible. Here the channels are in abundance. So this is the area where the action potential starts. This is also called as the initial segment or the trigger zone of the neuron. And as I said, once it starts here, it keeps on propagating further. Right? So this completes our topic on your synapses. So we have learned about the structure of the synapse, right? Types of the synapse. We also seen the difference between electrical and the chemical synapse. We have also revised the different neurotransmitter systems, some of them excitatory, some of them inhibitory. We have seen that the receptors on the postsynaptic neuron can be ionotropic, that means ion channels, or it can be metabotropic, that means they will transmit with the help of G proteins. The initial or the individual response in the postsynaptic element in the individual synapse is either a EPSP or a IPSP, but a single neuron in the body will have a lot of such synaptic points, and the final effect in the postsynaptic neuron will be the algebraic sum of the EPSPs and the IPSPs. If after summation it reaches the threshold of the firing level, जो target neuron है या postsynaptic neuron है, we can produce action potential there, and the signal will be conveyed further. Transmission will keep on happening. But if we talk of that the summated potential has not reached the firing level, signal transmission will stop. And this will happen when there are more number of IPSPs, right? Inhibitory postsynaptic potentials rather than EPSPs. Right? So this completes our topic on synapses. Next class, we'll talk about the properties of synapses and their clinical correlation. Right? Thank you.